Hey, you guys. Welcome once again to my Flickers of Fear movie review show. And just like I mentioned on the last couple reviews, it's the month of December, and I decided that I was going to do all, not necessarily Christmas horror movies, because there's not really enough of those, I guess, and I've already reviewed a lot of them. But I did actually want to do winter-themed horror movies, at least for this month. I might do it for the whole winter. We'll see where we're at with that. But because I kind of feel like I really like horror movies set in really isolated wintry locations. It just makes it creepier to me. Maybe it's because I grew up in Florida and it doesn't snow here, and so it almost seems like an alien landscape in a little bit. I don't know what it is. But so I'm going to try to do that all this month. So to that end, the one we are talking about today is a 2015 film called The Blackcoat's Daughter. Now, I reviewed I Am the Pretty Thing That Lives in the House a while back, which came out in 2016. And I think I mentioned on there, that was actually the second directorial film that was done by Oz Perkins, who obviously the son of Anthony Perkins, started out as an actor and then went into directing. Now, even though I Am the Pretty Thing actually premiered on Netflix in 2016 first, this movie, The Blackcoat's Daughter, was actually made before it, but it didn't get a wide release until after I Am the Pretty Thing came out on Netflix, and there was a little bit of buzz about it. So this is actually, The Blackcoat's Daughter is actually Oz Perkins' directorial debut. This is his first movie. And so it's kind of confusing because this movie did actually premiere in 2015, I think at the Toronto Film Festival and like Fantastic Fest and stuff. But then it sort of went into limbo with like distribution deals and whatnot. So it took like a long time to sort of get a wide release. I don't think it ever got a theatrical release. If it did, it was very limited. But, it came out like on streaming platforms later in 2017, I think. But the movie had been out like a few years prior to that. Now, interestingly, it started out, when it was first released, it was actually released under the title of February. I'm not entirely sure. I think it might still be called that in some territories. Like I think in Europe, if this is on UK Netflix, maybe some UK viewers can tell me, I think that it's still called that. But in the US and possibly Canada, I think it's still called The Blackcoat's Daughter. And that's the title that I'm going to use. Now, this movie is really difficult to discuss without spoiling it. So I'm going to say that this is one, because I kind of wanted to do a deep dive on it. This is the second time that I've watched it. And this is one of those movies that the more times you watch it, like the more layers reveal themselves. And again, it's very difficult to talk about without talking about like the twists and spoilers and things like that. So I am going to discuss it in depth, so that will necessitate spoilers. That said, I think this is a really good movie where you want to go into it knowing as little as possible. I normally advocate that for most movies, but this one in particular, I think it's better to go into it not really knowing where it's going. So if you haven't seen the movie and you want to approach it that way, then probably you shouldn't watch this. You just go watch the movie first and then come back, because I'm going to spoil all kinds of shit about it. Now, I will say, though, just out front before I spoil anything, that if you didn't dig I Am the Pretty Thing That Lives in the House, if you didn't dig Oz Perkins' newer movie, Gretel and Hansel, then you will probably not dig this one either, because it's still very art house. It's very deliberately paced. And I will say that, like, I Am the Pretty Thing, which I loved, by the way, but I can understand like how some people's like, oh, nothing happened, or it was like boring or whatever. I get that. I don't agree, but everybody has subjective tastes, I will say that I Am the Pretty Thing is actually a bit more abstract than this one, and is not, because really not a lot happens in that. This one actually has a lot of the same aspects of I Am the Pretty Thing, like the way the shots are composed, the way the dialogue unfolds, everything's kind of like implication, ambiguity, but more stuff does quote unquote happen in this. So in the third act, you do actually get quite a lot of violence, and some gore and stuff. Whereas I Am the Pretty Thing is just more kind of like a very staid ghost story. This one has more of a little bit more, I don't want to say over the top, but it has a little bit more of a horror aspect to it, I guess, in the sense that it does have to do with, there are some real violent sequences, and there is some stuff about demonic kind of shit going on in it too, like pretty clearly. So I don't know if that like changes your mind about wanting to watch it or not, because like I said, I know that some people, the main criticism of I Am the Pretty Thing was like, oh, nothing happened. It was just kind of like these creepy shots of empty rooms and stuff like that. But this has a lot of that to it, where there's long shots of just kind of creepy corridors and empty rooms, and like a lot of the conversations between the characters are kind of like halting, or ambiguous, and you're not really sure what it all means. A lot of stuff is kind of left to implication, and that's what I mean when I say you really have to see this one a couple of times, because the more times you see it, like the more layers kind of reveal themselves. I do kind of feel like a lot of people, the first time they saw this, were sort of confused as to how the two storylines tied together. I did not find that confusing. It was pretty clear to me, like when the twist, or whatever you want to call it, was revealed. But I can understand why some people might have been confused by it. But I will say, like I said, if you dug the movie the first time and you were just kind of like, well, I didn't really quite get it, watch it again with the foreknowledge of what happens at the end and how the two stories tie together. And I think you'll find that there's a lot of little clues and things like that that are kind of turning up in there that maybe passed you by the first time because you didn't know what the ending was going to be. So this movie essentially, and this is probably like where the spoilery stuff starts. I'm just going to give a plot synopsis, but then I'll get into the stuff. But, like I said, if you don't want to know anything about the movie, then obviously go watch it first and then come back and watch this, because I'm going to spoil pretty much the whole thing. So this movie ostensibly follows 3 young women. Now, one of these is Kat, who's played by Kiernan Shipka, who probably best known for being on Mad Men, and then she was on that Sabrina show. Is that on Netflix? I'm not really sure. I haven't seen it, but she is on that. So she's in this. Lucy Boynton, who plays a character named Rose. She was also in I Am the Pretty Thing. She played Polly Parsons. And then you have Emma Roberts playing a character named Joan. Now, these 3 young women's storylines seem to be intersecting. Now, the one that we're seeing kind of first is the one between with Kat and Rose. Now, these 2 young women are students at a remote Catholic boarding school. It's supposed to be upstate New York, although it was shot in Ottawa. So it's very, very snowy, very bleak, very isolated. Nice little touch. The boarding school that they go to is called the Bramford, which horror fans will remember is the name of the building where all the action took place in Rosemary's Baby. So, there's lots of little Easter eggs like that, too. I think there actually might be another sort of slight offhand reference to Rosemary's Baby in there later on. I'm not entirely sure about that, but I'll kind of get into that in a minute. So Kat is a freshman, and Rose is, I'm guessing, like an upperclassman, like a senior or something like that. This is set in February. Like, I've seen some reviews. It's really weird because, like, I read some reviews of it that seem like they're really in-depth, but they get really easy shit wrong. Like, a couple reviews that I saw that said it was set around Christmas time, or it was like Christmas break. It's clearly not. It's set in February, like the end of February. So it's the end of winter, the winter semester, and they're, the students are taking a week off, for whatever. So, and then the spring semester will start afterward, because it's very, very clearly there's a calendar that Kat marks off, and it's, the end of February. And the movie was called February, like when it started. So that should just clue you in right there. So these 2 young women, it's the end of February. There's going to be a week's vacation. There's kind of like a little talent show type thing that Kat's going to be playing piano and singing at. But then everybody's parents are supposed to come and pick up the students and take them home for a week for their their winter vacation. Now, for 2 very different reasons, neither Kat's nor Rose's parents show up to pick them up. Now, at first, you're not entirely sure why Kat's parents don't show up. Now, she has had pretty much the first scene of the movie is her having a nightmare of her parents, presumably, dying in a car crash, or that's what you're led to believe anyway. So she seems to believe this is true. So when her parents don't actually show up to pick her up when they're supposed to, and when she's made several attempts to call them, and the headmaster makes attempts to call them and can't get anybody, they can't get in touch with them, she starts to believe that they are dead. Now, Rose, her thing is that she has been sneaking out with her boyfriend, so she's more like the rebellious chick type, and she suspects that she might be pregnant, and she wants a few more days to kind of figure out what she's going to do, like before she sees her parents. So she actually presumably lied to her parents about when the vacation started so they wouldn't be there to pick her up. So these two girls are kind of left at this school. The headmaster leaves. It's a Catholic school, so they also have kind of like the head priest guy or whatever, whose name is Father Brian, I think. And basically, they're just kind of like, okay, well, we can't get hold of either one of your parents, so you're just going to have to stay here for a few days until your parents show up. The headmaster's leaving, the head priest is leaving, but there are these two nuns, these two women who live at the school, presumably, and they're like, okay, well, they'll be here. And they ask Rose, the older student, to look after Kat, the younger one. Now, pretty shortly after this happens, because Rose is just kind of like, yeah, no, I'm not like babysitting this kid who it's like, I don't even know her, and also she's a little bit weird. So she's basically like, just don't touch my shit, stay out of my room, I'm not babysitting you. And so she just like sneaks out to see her boyfriend again, like to tell him about being pregnant or whatever. Now, over the course of the story, Kat's behavior starts getting weirder and weirder. As I said, for a long time, you're not actually sure if her parents are really dead or if there's something else going on. But she starts just acting real creepy. Like, she kind of acts creepy even from the beginning, because there's this really strange discussion with the headmaster, or actually, no, it's with Father Brian at the beginning, and she's kind of asking him why he's not coming to her piano recital, and he's like, oh, I have to go to Albany and all this other stuff, and she's just acting really strange, you know what I mean? And like, the stuff she says is really strange. So she's kind of not right, like from the very, very beginning. But as the movie goes on, her behavior starts getting weirder and weirder. Like, she starts looking like she's really ill. She comes to the table at one point and pretty much barfs all over the table when they ask her to say grace. She's answering the phone and like talking. She seems to be like talking to somebody. And Rose even hears voices coming through the radiator and goes down to the basement and finds her pretty much like prostrating herself in front of the boiler, like in the basement, like doing this really creepy like kind of thing like that. And she's like, what the fuck is up with this chick? So they have all these really kind of weird discussions. Now, while all that's going on, we're also intercutting with another story that you're actually not sure until the end how it relates to the main story, I guess. And this story is following another young girl whose name is presumably Joan. And she gets off the bus, like at this bus station. And you can tell she's had these weird, like, flashbacks of a cop, like, pointing a gun at her. And there's also a quick flashback of her, looks like she's strangling somebody, maybe. So she's in the bathroom of this bus station, and she's pulling like a medical bracelet like off her arm. So you're presuming that she has escaped from a mental hospital, and that is indeed what has happened. So she's at this bus station and is looking for a place to go. And this Good Samaritan couple, this couple named Bill and Linda, he actually, he's very, very religious, and he feels bad for her because she's sitting out waiting for somebody like this bus, and it's freezing cold outside, and she just has a really light coat on. And so he feels bad, and he's like, well, where are you going? We'll give you a ride. And it comes to pass that they are actually going to Bramford. Now, the first time I watched this movie, I thought, oh, these are Kat's parents, and they're on the way to the school to pick her up, and they're running late. Maybe they're running late because they picked this girl up or something like that. There's little clues to the things like there's some like a bouquet of flowers in the back seat, which I thought, oh, well, they're going to, they see their daughter's recital and they're bringing her flowers for the recital or whatever, and or to apologize for her for being late or whatever it is. And there's even like a Bramford bumper sticker on the back. So obviously they have they have a daughter that goes to that school. So and I think that is what the movie wants you to think. However, that is actually not what's going on. But I like that the movie kind of like misdirects you to that way. So we're following that story too. And like I said, like when you first see the movie, you're not really sure how Joan's story relates to them. But little bitty clues start to come, like, just a little bit. And this is a movie, again, that you really, really have to pay attention to every single little detail. Because when you watch it again, after knowing what the twist is, like, I hate calling it a twist. That sounds so M. Night Shyamalan. But it's a kind of a twist, I guess. But I guess revelation would be a better word. So essentially, if you know the revelation, you can go back and watch like the first 2/3 of the movie, and there's all kind of little clues in there about what's really going on. But if you don't know, then you don't really. So I like that it's very, very subtle, but it is actually there. So meanwhile, back at Bramford School, Kat is getting pretty damn crazy, and it comes to pass that she basically believes that she is possessed by the devil. Like I said, it kind of, it follows their narratives, like sort of chronologically, kind of, but it does cut back and forth between them. So you're not entirely sure like what the timeline is, right? But she starts seeing, the phone rings in the hallway and she picks it up and a demonic voice is, telling her things, and she calls it daddy and stuff. And she starts seeing it, essentially what it kind of looks like. I really like the decision of showing the devil, at least as she's perceiving it. It's basically just kind of like a fuzzy shadow just in the corner, like, or standing behind somebody or something like that. If you can't see its face, it's just this black fuzzy thing with like big horns on it. It kind of looks like Krampus, actually. Some people said it looked like the bunny from Donnie Darko, like Frank, which it kind of does too. But like I said, it looked more like Krampus to me, honestly. It looks kind of fuzzy with like big horns, but you never see its face. It's always just like this kind of blurry shadow that she sees in the background. So it comes to pass that that the devil that has possessed her, essentially, is telling her to kill everybody at the school. The movie, really, the theme of the whole movie, the whole point of Kat's character is loneliness, is her, isolation. And even though she's at a school with all these other girls, you can tell even at the beginning, and like I said, so much of this is unspoken. A lot of it is implication. A lot of it is in the actress's facial expressions. So it's very, very subtle, but it actually is there if you look into it. And there's hints at a lot of stuff that was maybe going on in her background or in her history, and none of it's really overt, but you can kind of come up with a lot of different interpretations of maybe why she became possessed by the devil, if she is indeed possessed by the devil. Because there's kind of a controversy about whether Kat is actually possessed, as in, the devil is actually really at the school, and it took advantage of her vulnerability, of her loneliness, and her lack of ability to connect with anyone else, her fear of abandonment. That's kind of a big thing too. Did it just take advantage of that, or is she just severely mentally ill, and that's how her mental illness is manifesting itself by making her believe that she's possessed by the devil? I lean more toward the latter, but you could totally read it either way. Most people that think that she is actually possessed, they point out that at the very beginning of the movie, she has what appears to be a premonition that her parents are dead, that they died in a car crash on the way to get her. Now, the thing about it, though, is that, one, they leave it, I don't know if I'd say they leave it ambiguous, but it is implied that her parents did die. They never say it outright, but there is a scene where Mr. Gordon, the headmaster, he actually shows up at one point later on with a cop, and they're kind of like talking about, and the nuns like know some information, and they tell it to Rose, the other girl, but they don't tell Kat. So I'm assuming that the news was that her parents are indeed dead, because they never do show up. So it is like supernatural, maybe, that she had a premonition that her parents were dead, because that happened at the very beginning of the movie. But that happening at the very beginning of the movie, that doesn't necessarily mean that's what it happened. You know what I mean? So I kind of feel like, yeah, the devil might have told her, hey, your parents are dead. You have nobody. Because one of the themes of the movie, too, is that, you know, with whether it was foreknowledge or not, of knowing that her parents are dead and they're never coming for her, leaving her alone and abandoned. And then there's all this kind of stuff where she's left alone at the school with Rose. Rose is just kind of like, yeah, I'm not babysitting you. Get the fuck out of my room. And she just doesn't want to deal with her. So there's rejection right there. You know, and there's one scene where when Rose even later on like comes back and is like, hey, you okay? She's like, oh, you had your chance. Like, you had your chance to be my friend, like to connect with me, and you didn't. So it's too late for you now. There's also scenes earlier where she's talking to, you know, Father Brian, and seems upset that he's going to Albany and he's not going to be there for her recital. You know, there's a scene with Mr. Gordon, the headmaster, like after, you know, it's determined that her parents are late or not showing up. And he says something kind of jokingly, oh, well, you can't live here. And then later on, like when she's talking on the phone, like to the devil, presumably, she calls it Mr. Gordon a few times. Like, Mr. Gordon says I can live here. So Kat's character, this is actually a very tragic, I mean, the shit she does is like not forgivable, like later on, because she gets real stabby and murdery later. But it's very sad because she was clearly very mentally ill. And even though she went to a school with a bunch of other girls, couldn't really connect with anybody, so she was very isolated. And this sort of inciting incident perhaps of her parents dying and leaving her completely alone, you know, either made her vulnerable to a psychotic break in which she perceived that she was possessed by the devil, or if you want to read a more supernatural, you know, more exorcisty type of thing, she actually was possessed by the devil. The devil just took advantage of her vulnerability during that time period. Because there is a scene where, and this is perhaps where the idea was put into her head, or there might be another reading to it too, where Rose tells her, oh, the two nuns that were left at the school, like to take care of them, oh, it was rumored that they were Satanists, that they found them one time like down in the boiler room and their heads were shaved, they don't have any hair on their bodies and all this other kind of stuff. So I don't really know. You could read it in the way that Rose telling her that story put the idea into her head that, you know, there's Satanism going on, and that's just how her, you know, mental illness or her mental breakdown manifested itself. Or you could argue that the nuns were actually Satanists, so Satan was just kind of like hanging around this building, and you know, and they saw this he saw this vulnerable little girl, then decided he was going to possess her or take advantage or whatever. The interesting thing about this story, and I haven't even got into the whole like revelation about Joan, I'll get into that in a minute, but the interesting thing about this story is that you could call it an exorcism movie, because there is kind of like a little minor exorcism. And yes, it is. She is supposedly possessed. She does like the contortion and the throwing up and everything. Very, very subtle, very downplayed. It's not like one of those movies where, like, you know, your standard exorcism movie where she does all this like crazy shit. It's almost kind of like a subversion of that. Because the interesting thing about it is that if she is indeed possessed by the devil, or perceives that she's possessed by the devil, she doesn't want the devil to leave. She sees the devil as her only friend, or perhaps as a father figure, because there's kind of an underlying thing of that. There's also kind of an underlying, and maybe I'm just seeing this and this isn't in there, but I thought that there was also kind of an underlying, slight, subtle implication of maybe sexual abuse, maybe not coming from her dad, but maybe she does seem to have like some weird, I hate to use the phrase daddy issues, but she does seem to have like some serious daddy issues. So they never show her father. In her premonition of the car crash, she's walking beside a man who you presume is her father, who has a black coat on, and then you see like the wrecked car with blood and stuff, and she says, you know, mom, like as in her mom was in the car, but she says to dad this like, oh, you came early, she says. There's also a scene which is like a flashback scene, which is actually Joan's flashback of Father Brian kind of like leaning over her, and you find out that later that was like an exorcism, but there was also kind of an implication, because, you know, Catholic priests, they have a certain reputation. You know what I'm saying? Justified or not, I'm just saying there's a reputation that they have. And so that scene in particular, that being a flashback, might have been implying something else. So the whole storyline with Joan, what you find out with Joan, as I mentioned earlier, in Joan's storyline, obviously she's escaped from a mental hospital. She's trying to go back to Bramford, although she doesn't say that. She's actually says she's going to the next town or the town before that. So this couple that picks her up, who at first you think are Kat's parents, but you find out over the course of the story, as Joan's story goes on, you find out that these are actually Rose's parents, and that Rose is dead, and that this is actually 9 years later. So the whole stuff that you thought was going on in the same timeline, that's not going on in the same timeline. The whole thing with Rose and Kat was 9 years ago. The stuff with Joan and Rose's parents is present day. So they're actually going to Bramford because that's where Rose was murdered, and they're putting flowers on her grave, which is something that they do every year. Now, it turns out that Joan is not her real name. Joan is actually the woman that she killed to escape from the mental hospital and stole her ID. So that's why that's the name she's going by. Joan is actually Kat 9 years later. And you find out that she was put in the asylum because, obviously, she killed the nuns and she killed Rose in a really horrible way, cut off their heads, and took their heads down to the boiler room as an offering to the demon. So because this happened, she was actually taken to a mental hospital. Father Brian came and did an exorcism on her. But the exorcism, which, like I said, was just kind of like a minor, like, hey, get out or whatever. But Kat doesn't want the demon to leave. Like, she, at the exorcism, she looks over and she sees the devil over there, like the shadow, and she says, don't go. That was her only friend. That was her father figure. So he also abandoned her in the end. So she gets sent to a mental hospital. She's in there for 9 years. And then she escapes with the hopes of going back to the Bramford and making another offering of heads to the devil in the hopes that he will come back. So that's kind of what she did. Now, some people were confused that, you know, when Joan / Kat broke out of the mental hospital, she was actually going to specifically like hunt Rose's parents, like to kill them. That is not the case. It was a total coincidence because there's a whole discussion after Bill and Linda, Rose's parents, like pick Joan up. And they take, you know, they get her a hotel room and stuff like that. And there's a whole discussion between Bill and Joan where it's mostly Bill talking. Joan doesn't hardly say anything. But Bill is discussing, he's like, well, he's very religious. So he says, well, I see God in all these coincidences. And the fact that I saw you on the bus bench and you remind me of my daughter, who was Rose, and I believe we should, help people, and I don't believe in coincidences. The irony of the fact is that, he thought he sees God in the coincidences, but you could argue that Satan was in the coincidences because, honestly, like Joan, when she finds out that these are Rose's parents, these are the parents of the girl she killed 9 years ago, she just almost can't believe her luck. She's like in the bathroom and she like laughs. You know what I mean? Like, oh my God, I can't believe that happened. This must be meant to be. I think that was what the implication was, that she thought that was Satan saying to her, hey, I brought you these, like, kill them and bring them and I'll come back. And so she thought that's what she was supposed to do. It was meant to be. So she ends up killing the parents and cutting their heads off and taking the heads back to the Bramford, which, because of the tragedy, has now been closed and abandoned. And the sad thing about it is that she takes these heads down to the boiler where she contacted the devil before and puts them there, but the boiler is cold. The devil is gone. And so the very last scene of the movie is Joan / Kat, grown-up Kat, and she's just in this, on this road, all this snow in the middle of nowhere. There's nowhere else around. And she just like screams and cries because I guess it could be both things. Either because she realizes now she's completely alone, the devil's not going to come back, or she realizes that she just killed two people for nothing. Like, it was just like a sacrifice, and she did it on her own. She wasn't even possessed, so she didn't even have that excuse. You know, it was all for nothing. She just murdered them for nothing. So honestly, like, the more you watch this movie, like, the more little details and layers and shit like that you find about it, and it's just, I liked it so much better. I mean, I liked it the first time, and I got it the first time. I got the twist that Joan is supposed to be Kat. Yes, it's a different actress, and I kind of feel like people bitched a lot about that too. Like, they felt like, oh, that was a cheat because those two actresses don't look anything alike. But I think you'll find if you put pictures of them next to each other, they actually do look quite a bit alike. So it's not crazy to think that Kat was, you know, she's put in a mental asylum, and obviously she looks kind of different when she comes out because it's been 9 years, and maybe she hasn't been, you know, treated all that well, or she's had like some shit going on. So it's not crazy to think that. Yeah, and honestly, they actually did the two actresses that played the two parts, because a lot of people complain too. It's like, oh, they look like they're the same age, but in real life, those actresses were actually almost exactly 9 years apart, which I'm pretty sure they did on purpose. So it's totally plausible. But I mean, obviously, if they had used the same actress, or they used actresses that looked even more alike, then you wouldn't have had that misdirection aspect to it. You would have thought, you know, you would have figured it out immediately. And I think it's better to not figure out immediately. And I like movies like this that don't really like hold your hand. You know, like I said, it's going on two different timelines, but you don't really realize that until like the third act. And I think that is actually like really, really cool. I mean, honestly, when I figured it out in the scene with the restaurant with Bill and Joan, and he is like, oh, here's my daughter. She died. He didn't say she was murdered. He just said she died 9 years ago. And he says something to Joan like, oh, she'd be your age now. So that's another clue. And shows the picture, and it's Rose. And I was just kind of like, oh my God, that's got to be Kat then, like 9 years later. But it took me like that long to figure it out. But I did actually figure it out. But knowing that, it's actually great to go back and watch it again, because there's just so much like subtle little imagery. And it's one of those ones too where there's actually like a lot of little scenes of like the devil, like he's kind of like reflected very vaguely, like in the, you know, in the tiles in the bathroom. So it's all very, very subtle. The cinematography on this, gorgeous. Like I said, if you really liked I Am the Pretty Thing, I probably mentioned this when I talked about that movie, that there's this real creeping like unease about the way the shots are framed. I believe this is the same cinematographer that did both of these. Please correct me if I'm wrong. But the way that the movies are framed, where you're never really sure, like there's these kind of, in I Am the Pretty Thing, there was like these white walls, and then like this doorway into another room was just like black, you know what I mean? So you're always kind of expecting things to like kind of be creeping around in the corners. And so this kind of has that similar kind of thing, where it's just like this, some of these wide shots, and everything's like very stark and bleak and isolated, and you're never really sure where something might be lurking or what might be happening around the corner. So this is another movie that, while it's not scary, there's not like big jump scares or anything like that, but it's definitely like really unsettling, and the implications of it really stick with you, because as I mentioned, this is almost like an inversion of an exorcism movie. An exorcism movie being, you know, someone, usually a young woman, is invaded by a demon and it takes their agency away. Whereas this one is a girl who is inviting the demon in and doesn't want it to leave, and is willing to commit murder and beheading to get the demon to stay, because she's so desperate for a friend or for someone who will be with her forever. And so in that way, you know, as horrifying as what she does is, you kind of feel bad for her, because she's just so broken, you know, and she just has this, like I said, this sense of like loss and abandonment, that no one will stay with her. Nobody loves her, nobody needs her. And the fact that she was that open to, you know, doing anything just to have this devil inside of her that gave her, I don't know, just this friendship or love that she felt like she never had. So in a way, I can't really think of another exorcism type movie where somebody wanted the demon, you know what I mean? Where it wasn't an invasion, it was actually, well, I guess you could say The Witch was kind of like that. And there was actually a movie, it was kind of more of a horror comedy called Ava's Possessions. Was it a comedy? Yeah, I guess it was more of like a horror comedy. And the main character didn't want the demon, but there was another, if you haven't seen Ava's Possessions, it's actually about people who were possessed by demons, and then there's like a support group for people that used to be like, so it's kind of funny, but it's really good actually if you haven't seen it. I think it came out in 2016, 2017, something like that. But there was another, it wasn't the main character, but there was another girl in the support group who was trying to get the demon back because she really liked him. So, but other than that, I can't really think of any other exorcism possession type movie that really explores this sort of gray area of, you know, what if somebody was just so lost and broken and isolated and alone that they were completely willing to have this demon come in there because it was the only thing that loved them. And like I said, it's kind of like a daddy kind of figure too, because I definitely feel like there's a lot of father figure type stuff going on in this. That, like I said, nothing's overt. This is a very, very subtle, very restrained type of movie. Like I said, some people might say boring because, like, oh, there's nothing going on. This has more going on than I Am the Pretty Thing, for sure, especially in the third act, because, like I said, it gets pretty gnarly. Like, there's stabbings and beheadings and crazy shit like that going on, but it's kind of the same type of thing. Like I said, it's very deliberately paced, you know, and you really have to pay attention to little bitty details to get the story, because it's not, you know, there's not a lot of dialogue that will tell you what the story is. Everything's kind of like between the lines, you know what I mean? So it's that kind of thing. And I love movies like that. I know some people don't, and I'm not shitting on you if you don't. I'm just saying, obviously, it's an A24 movie. That's who distributed it. And those are not everyone's cup of tea. I get that. But this one, honestly, watching this one a second time, I think the first time I watched this one and I Am the Pretty Thing, I think I slightly preferred I Am the Pretty Thing because I really liked the creepy, like the ghost story type thing, and I liked like the novelist. I liked that aspect. But watching them a second time, I think I might slightly prefer this one, even though it does have some tropes of exorcism possession movies, but it's doing something interesting with it. And honestly, I'm kind of the opinion, and I'm not saying that like the other interpretation is wrong. I'm of the opinion that there is no devil, that she's just, that's how her mental breakdown is manifesting itself. So I don't think there's actually a demon wandering around at the Bramford that the nuns, like, you know, summoned or whatever. I think that she had the idea put into her head because of, you know, the story that Rose told and just all these things of her feeling like isolated from everybody, her parents dying. And so I think that's just how it manifested itself. So she started acting like a possessed person would act, I think. But you could totally read it the other way, that the devil is real and just took her over because she was vulnerable. You know, it works either way, which I think is like really great. And that's why I really like these sort of like arty, ambiguous films like this, because there are just multiple interpretations. And, you know, I really like that. So if you have not seen this movie, obviously you should have stopped watching by now because I just spoiled pretty much the whole fucking thing. But if you still want to watch it after all that, I think it might be on Netflix in the UK. I don't think it's on Netflix here anymore. I think I Am the Pretty Thing might still be. I actually rented it on Amazon Prime for $3.99. I think you can also rent it on YouTube for $3.99, and it's totally worth it. If you really like those creepy, atmospheric A24 indie art house type movies, and you really like stuff that you need to watch over and over again because of all these little clues and subtle hints and everything like that, then this will totally be right up your alley. So if you've seen it, let me know what you thought about it in the comments. If you have a different interpretation to me, I'd be really interested to hear what it is. And that'll do it for this Flickers of Fear, and I will see you guys on the next one. Bye.